You're watching the Team Nerd Tech Show with your hosts, Tim Gillen and Ruthie Kierlin.
Hey, nerds. Thanks for joining us on the Team Nerd Tech Show. One more wonderful week of wonderful Tech Digest news. Tim Gillen here, Terrapin Networks, Traverse City, Michigan. I am joined this week, just like every week on the Team Nerd Tech Show, with my co-host from Queens, New York, Ruthie Kierlin. We're here to talk for the next 30 minutes or so to small business owners. Real small, primarily. And if you've got 5, 6, 8, 10, 20, 40 employees and you've got a smaller office that you're maintaining, we've kind of built our whole tech philosophy around that kind of company. Sometimes we're overlooked in our companies this size by the tech support providers. We don't really have any options because they want stuff that's bigger and they don't really want to help us. But we're not large enough of a smaller company like that to have our own full-time IT person. It doesn't make sense to split someone's duties because they're not going to be usually very good at either. Technology requires a lot of knowledge, even for a smaller company, especially for a smaller company, because you can be vulnerable to lots of problems and you can really use technology to help propel your business forward if it's done right. So we really focus on talking about tech news and tech tips, some things to watch out for, some gadgets that make sense to us as the small business owner. So that's what we're going to do here now for the next 30 minutes. Ruthie, what have you got for us?
Hello there, Tim.
Hello.
How are you this week?
Good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you.
Good.
So this is episode 54 for those of you who are following along at home. If you want to catch up on the links or anything that we speak about on the teamnerdtechshow.com. This week for tech news, we're going to be talking about battery life truths. There's this cool article that you sent me from cnet.com about kind of dispelling some myths around phone batteries, about how charging it might deplete your battery, does it, et cetera, et cetera. Fast charging, does it have an effect? So we're going to kind of get into this article here and break up these myths. For tech tip, more phone conversation, because we're going to be talking about whether it makes sense for small business owners to be concerned about, should I have an iPhone or an Android-based business? Does it matter what type of phone I give to my employees if that's something that I offer? So we're going to talk about whether that's something you should actually take into consideration, the type of phone that you have. And then for tech gadget, you sent me this very cool extension for browsers, a browser extension developed by the EFF organization. I want you to talk about more what EFF is, what they do, and how this cool browser extension that they developed, how it works to help with typical privacy matters that people might run into online. Welcome back to the Team Nerd Tech Show with your host, Tim Gillen. I am Ruthie Kierlin. So let's get into this tech news now and talk about this article from cnet.com called 6 Battery Life Truths about Galaxy phones and iPhones and everything. So what does this article really break down for us here about batteries?
So what this talks about, this article came out kind of as a reaction to the Samsung announcing their newest Galaxy phones, the S20. They kind of took a jump in the number, 10 to 20. But
missed 10 phones there, but okay.
Yeah, that's all right. So anyway, the S20, they're nice phones. They're not a huge generational difference. They're just a nice improvement. A little bit larger screen, a little bit better camera. The normal stuff. We can talk about some of that in a later episode. We plan to. But on the heels of the iPhone 11 coming out last fall, and a lot of new phones come out in the fall, Galaxy brings their first ones out in the spring. Always has their notes come out at the late summer, which is their largest phone. But the Galaxies are terrific phones. But this conversation comes up about charging the battery. Do you overcharge it? Do you wait till it's almost dead?
Yeah.
And you overcharge it? Do you wreck the battery by charging it? And a nice article held by a gentleman named Clifford Colby, who's a writer for CNET, cnet.com. We'll have the link out in teamnerdtechshow.com. And he talks about what are actually some myths, which really are some myths for current battery, the current.
And I think, that's the important thing, that it's about current battery stuff, because I feel like sometimes I'm thinking of things that I've always done concerning my batteries, like letting it run to the end or anything like this, so you can get a good charge. But that's not really actually true anymore.
No,
for
it's
current
not at
batteries.
all. It's not at all for the current types of phones and the current batteries. No, you don't want to do that. So batteries on smartphones are a big driver for what makes a smartphone seem like it's a good phone to you. If it's always losing battery by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, you start to really get frustrated.
Totally. You're like, what a piece of junk.
It gets very frustrating. So one of the things they've done, they've always been able to make phones have larger batteries, they not only cost more, but the phone itself becomes larger. So they've got this fight with keeping the battery slim enough to keep the phone slim enough, but still have enough capacity
Yeah.
and not get real hot if they're being used a lot, because as they're generating more energy, and of course the heat then dissipates the battery charge a little bit quicker. So there's this constant thing they've been fighting. The old cell phones, back in the day, to use that phrase, were all NiCad batteries, nickel cadmium. And then they moved on to lithium ion batteries, which is what we use now. And that's all we've used for several years. Lithium is a metal that has to be mined. It's mostly out of Africa. It's a messy mining, and it's one of those things that at some point is going to go away because there's only so much lithium they can dig out of the ground.
Okay.
But the lithium right now still is what we're using. And one of the ways that this article talks about, what's really changed about batteries is how they charge, is the technology around the charging and discharging. And they've made a lot of real jumps in this. So we used to think in the old NiCad days, you trained your battery, you ran it dead a few times and then charged it up all the way. And people still do that with some of the early lithium ion batteries too, which is LION. Looks like lion, uppercase L, small I, uppercase O, small n, but that stands for lithium ion. And that's what's happening inside. It's lithium, and there's ion particles that come together during a charge. But what happens, and then slowly dissipate. But what happens here is if the electronics around the charging works well, then they can charge faster. And also it helps with the discharging at a more smooth rate that also doesn't generate heat. Because if you don't want the charging to generate too much heat, and you don't want the discharging to generate too much heat.
Back when those Note 10s were, I think it was Note 8 actually, was exploding in people's
Note
pockets
7
and everything.
maybe, but and the batteries were expanding. Now, if you've ever seen this, we see this sometimes in UPSs, uninterruptible power supplies, big battery backups that we use next to servers.
Okay.
And over time, those things will sit there and run, and then the battery starts to fail on them, which we can replace. A lot of those are nickel cadmium, and some are actually wet cell. But the point is, you'll see them sometimes to pull them out, and they're all expanded. They've actually kind of bloated.
Like bloated out.
Yeah, they're hard to get out of the case sometimes. That's what happens when a battery gets overcharged, when the electronics around the charging becomes too much. Now, what happens here with these newer phones is you don't need to run them all the way down. You don't even want to, because it doesn't help the life of the battery, and we don't need it for there's no memory in a lithium ion battery in any kind of a current cell phone. There's no. So
it's okay to just leave it on the charge all the time.
Well, that's the second story. My first part of this was don't wait to charge it until it's dead. If it's down at 30%, don't think I should use it before I charge it. If it's the end of the day, go ahead and charge it. The other side of that now is on the top end part, which you just mentioned, is that these all of the newer phones, and by that I mean probably 1 or 2 generations back of a current phone, whether it's a Samsung Galaxy or a OnePlus 6, OnePlus 7, whatever kind of phone it might be, and certainly any of the iPhones, having much better circuitry that they don't overcharge. They just don't. So you can leave it on all night.
And they can reach the end of their charging period basically and just stop and stay there.
Yeah. And commonly what the batteries, the good chargers do is, well, there's a setting, for example, in iOS 13, in the latest iOS version on an iPhone, where you can put in a battery charging optimization switch. And what that'll do is only takes up to about 80% and then sits there and waits until it does some machine learning and realizes if you're always unplugging the phone at 6 a.m., right about 5:30 a.m., it'll do that last part of the charge.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, a great way. My laptop has this. All newer laptops have a setting where you can tell it to only charge to 80%, because that's one of the things that can wear out a battery, is always making it go to 100%. Yeah, so right around 80% is actually a perfect spot to take a battery to if you want longer life out of it. But even that being said, the charging is such that it doesn't just sit there and charge all night. If you plug it in next to your nightstand and you go to sleep, it doesn't just charge all night and get all hot and get and wasted. So you'll notice I just moved from an Android phone over to an iPhone, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but I used a Google Pixel 2 XL, one of their larger phones, so it has a nice large battery. And I saw almost no battery change over 2 full years, and I tend to charge most every night. And I saw the battery got a little bit, I noticed some less capacity but not very much.
And
It
this was
used to
toward
be.
the end of having your phone. It was still,
Yeah,
the battery was
after
still
two and
working
a
as
half
well as it
years.
was. That's pretty
Yes,
good.
thank you. Yeah, after well over 2 years, I noticed almost no difference. Now, it used to be you got rid of a phone. One of the reasons you got rid of it,
Because your battery would give
after a
you like
couple
a
of years, your
half a
battery was
day.
half as good as it
Yeah.
used to be. Exactly. That's not the case anymore, and that's partly because they've improved the technology of the lithium ion, but also again mostly because of the circuitry around the charging and the discharging.
And now, what does that have? Does that have anything to do with fast charging? Does that affect the life of your battery or not? Using those
No, it doesn't.
newfangled fast chargers?
No, it doesn't. And there's the quick charge and the fast charge, and
Yeah,
Samsung uses a slightly
which
different
are
one
amazing. I
than
rely
Apple, and they're
heavily on
just
them.
terrific. They
Yeah,
can just give you a big bump to 70 or 80%, 70%
in like 20 minutes.
in like 20 minutes. They're just outstanding. It takes longer to top it off, but that's okay. You want a quick charge.
Yeah.
And they work great, and it has no effect otherwise. Again, that's some advanced circuitry both on the charger side
Okay.
and on the battery side. And a neat thing that this article points out, which is a question I get asked, if my phone might be really built for the QC2, one of the quick chargers. If I use the other kind of fast charger, is that going to screw it up? The answer is no, it won't.
Oh, that's really good to know because I have
Yeah.
wondered the same.
Yeah,
Okay.
it does not. It may not be as efficient. You may not get that 70%
May
in
not be
20
as
minutes.
fast. Okay.
Exactly, but it's not going to hurt anything. And it's a nice thing that he pointed out here, and he brought out some of the reasons why. So that's good to know. You're not going to hurt yourself there. What hurts yourself with that kind of charging is counterfeit stuff, the real funky $8 chargers and the cheap
Okay.
cables. That causes more troubles because the circuitry's not as good. So
Got it.
there's a variety of brands. Anker is a good one, ANKER. There's a variety of off-brand ones where you don't have to buy the Samsung or Apple, for example, branded.
Yeah.
Just get one of the mainline ones, and you're going to spend generally $12 to $20 for a decent, just plug in the charger with a USB or USB-C connector on it.
So I really recommend this very helpful article from cnet.com. We're going to have this up on episode 54 of the Team Nerd Tech Show if you want to read about the 6 battery life truths for dealing with Galaxies and iPhones. Welcome back to the Team Nerd Tech Show with your host, Tim Gillen. I am Ruthie Kierwin. So let's keep talking about phones. All right, so our question here today about tech tip, the question that I want you to answer for me is, does it really matter whether you have iPhones or Androids in your small business? Like, should you as a small business owner decide, okay, we're a small business that deals with Androids, or we're a small business that deals with iPhones when it comes to apps we use, what I give to my employees? Like, does that actually matter? Is that a decision that a small business owner needs to make?
Generally, no.
Okay.
And I would say no as long as.
Okay.
No, as long as the particular app that you might use in your company does not require one or the other.
Okay.
And I'll add one more caveat. That would be really rare that it requires one or the other. If you're making an app for a small business, you're going to make both an Android and an iOS app for it.
All right.
Because why would you kill half your
exactly.
market? There's no reason to. Now, 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was a little different. A lot of times small business provided their cell phones that they wanted for their employees, that they wanted their employees to use for business. And that was partly because not everybody had the same kind of phone. People had flip phones when your new app might have required a smartphone. They had a flip phone that couldn't get email.
Yeah.
There's any number of reasons why. Well, we've shifted past that now. And in 2020, pretty much everybody's got a smartphone. So largely, generally, I would say a small office does not provide the actual cell phone to their employees. They might give them a stipend.
Okay.
$20 a month, whatever it might be, saying, because I know part of what you're going to do here is based on work, so I'll go ahead and kick in a little bit of that. That's very common. But you'd want your whatever app you use, if you do use an app, a lot of companies don't need to use a smartphone app for their staff or for most of their staff. Clerical staff was inside the office all day doing payroll or doing ordering or doing stock, shelf stocks and stuff. Probably doesn't need an app.
Well, some industries might have like an app specific, correct? That maybe somebody would use out in the field.
But that's mostly, you're only going to really have that for your staff that's out in the field. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Which in a lot of companies, may have a large staff, but there's only 3 or 4 people that are out in the field.
Yeah.
But sometimes everybody's out in the field. That's just the nature of their business. So that might kind of depend. But generally now, the company does not provide the cell phone, the mobile phone. The employee comes to the business with their mobile phone. And again, you might give them a stipend as the business owner if you expect them to use their phone for work or for at least a certain part of work, even if it's just email. you might feel the need to kick in, which is a fair thing to do.
Okay.
So does it need to be Android or iPhone? No, it really doesn't need to be. There's no particular reason for it. Again, because any app is going to have one for each. It's not really like inside your office where you're whether you're on a PC/Windows based ecosystem, if you will, or a Mac ecosystem, is largely dependent on what kind of software you need to use to run your company, most of which still is going to be out in Windows.
So in that instance, it would depend on making that decision as to whether you want to be a Mac company or a PC.
Yeah,
that matters.
And you're going to generally use Windows because there's more of it out there that's for running small companies. Now, if everything you do is cloud-based, then it really doesn't matter much because you're just using a browser. So, and we've got a lot of installations that have Macs and Windows in a combination. And sometimes it depends on the user and what that particular user does. Okay. And whether or not they need to use the main app, because most companies that are making an app that is a line of business app, as we call it, that is specifically written for a particular type of business, anything from if you're a veterinarian or an accountant or a law office or whatever it might be, they usually write those in Windows. There's a much larger market for it, and the SQL, the databases behind it, a lot of that stuff tends to be a little easier to implement. And so they tend to be Windows-based, but that doesn't mean that several of your users may not use Macs, and that they're doing design work, especially graphic design, artwork of any kind, video work of any kind, audio work. Mac is very strong in those fields. And once again, if everything you're doing is cloud-based, based off a browser and shared drives and that kind of thing,
then it's not maybe as important to decide.
It almost doesn't matter.
Okay.
So you can, and so we're very fluent, as most people who do what we do, where we do small business tech management.
In Terrapin Networks.
At Terrapin Networks here in Traverse City, Michigan. We see a little bit of both. We still see by far more Windows stuff, and all of our servers are Windows that are out there because that's pretty much all there really is for that. But we have a lot of Macs that we work with on a daily basis for people who use them. Sometimes it's their MacBook. Their laptop may be a Mac. So, but that gets driven largely by the kind of software in your company, not so much on the smartphone. Anyone who's writing an app to support their line of business app that's back on a network and is writing a mobile device app to support that, they're going to write it in both Android and iOS. Mm-hmm. Makes it almost a non-issue. I've never seen one that has just an iOS but not an Android or vice versa. Okay. I've never seen it. Now, I'm sure there are some. Might be some who think Android's dopey or think iOS is dopey, or for whatever reason they don't want to do that. But boy, that's rare. Because why would you do that? You're going to have people who won't buy your main line of business app because they've bought everybody in their company uses iPhones. And if you don't make an app for it, you're just shutting off a big part of your market. It's not difficult to say our app runs only on Windows inside the business. It's a little more difficult to say, and we won't support iOS outside the business. That would be unusual. So I don't see it. I think it's very uncommon because I've never seen it. One of the last thing to keep in mind on that is to make sure that there's some kind of mechanism so that when that person, your employee, separates from your company, they quit, they move on, they retire, you fire them, whatever it might be, that you're able to do something back on your system to remove that app. And
okay. So like it's part of your onboarding and offboarding, which is something we talk about pretty regularly.
Part of your onboarding, you're going to get the app all loaded with their credentials. Part of the offboarding is you're going to be able to remove that, or certainly remove the connection. Now, generally, you can sometimes do that by nothing more than just changing their password inside the app, and now the app that's on their phone doesn't work anyway. But you just want to be sure that you've thought that through, and that your tech team has some kind of plan of action for offboarding, as we call it, as much as onboarding. Okay. So same kind of thing when you hire them. When they leave, you want to be able to undo what you did during hiring.
So that they can't just leave your company and then still have access to this company-specific app.
Right. And, they may have left on very good terms. It's still inappropriate for them to be able to see the customer database. So,
okay.
And could be illegal depending on what line of work you're in.
So what do you mean by illegal? Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well,
what would be illegal to look out for?
Well, if you're a law firm doing family stuff, it's illegal you can't be sharing that stuff with people who aren't employees.
Or maybe HIPAA, something
or
based in
if you're
HIPAA?
A healthcare provider, HIPAA says that you cannot share protected health information with people who aren't under contract with your company. So there's a lot of insurance, any number of situations where you might have a lot of personal information where even if it's not completely illegal through statute, it's certainly unethical that someone who's not part of your firm that you have a relationship with and a control over at some level with that information. Oh yeah, well, Mary Beth still has access to all of your family stuff, but don't worry, she's really nice. Yeah, that's not.
That doesn't really fly, does it?
That doesn't fly. So it's not just, you don't want to rate that by how the separation went. Well, it's okay. Mary Beth retired. We all like her. We don't need to worry about that. It's the same thing. So I've asked people before, and they say, well, I'm not really worried about this ex-employee because of the reason they left. But I will ask them, well, you probably took their front door key. And then they, oh, yeah, I see what you mean. So that's really all it is.
So what it really comes down to in deciding whether you want an iPhone or an Android is not necessarily the ecosystem of Android and iPhone. It's making sure that this app has the accessibility for people to come on, come off, and you are in control. Really, that's the main thing. Okay.
Yeah. You may have a particular business where you do all of your business over the phone using a smartphone. Yeah. That's not unheard of. It's not as common in a small company, but a lot of startups could be pretty much run that way. Everything off the cloud using just their smartphone. But same difference, you're going to want to have access at the cloud level, the admin level at the cloud, to who has access to your company's information. So that part of it's no different.
Welcome back to the Team Nerd Tech Show with your host, Tim Gillen. I am Ruthie Kirwan. So let's move in now to Tech Gadget. I want you to explain to me this. It looks cool, but I need a little bit more information about what exactly this extension link is that you sent to me to look into. It's from a company, or it's from an organization, I should say, called EFF, and the extension itself is Privacy Badger. So what is it, who's it from, and what does it do?
Well, I'll be a little soapboxy here, so I hope everybody's ready for it. So the EFF is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they're out in San Francisco. And they are an early proponent of the open internet, meaning that information that's on the internet should be kept open, not be under control, not be under government control. They're very good about exposing a lot of the privacy issues we see, a lot of the privacy issues we have with the Googles and Facebooks of the world, who are kind of scarfing up data in the background without being open about it. And EFF really pushes hard against that. And the Privacy Badger is an extension that they've got for browser extension for Chrome or Firefox or Microsoft Edge, those primary, and Opera. Those are the primary. I think those are the only four that works very well at at shutting down your browser in the background for not tracking what the sites you're going to and not sending information back to the sites you're going through. It's a really good free browser extension that from what I've seen, I've run it now for a few weeks, causes no problems of any kind. I've not been able
There's
to
no lag or anything like that.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
And I find the EFF to be a very trustworthy organization. They're a nonprofit. They kind of sit, they're a little bit right, they're a little bit left, they're a little bit libertarian, a little bit everything, which is actually okay.
Yeah.
Because they stand for one thing, and that's internet freedom, and that we don't get hoodwinked by these companies into what is actually happening. We don't get hoodwinked by the ISPs by what's actually happening. We don't get hoodwinked by the government by what's actually happening. So they tend to try to expose what they can. And again, they're about electronic freedom. I'm a big proponent. Now, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, one of the early founders was John Perry Barlow. A lot of you may or may not know who John Perry Barlow is or was. Well, he was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead. He was actually was Bob Weir's sidekick, who's the guitarist for the Dead. So all the Bob Weir songs were co-written with John Barlow. They actually went to high school together. Had a long history. Yeah. Very interesting man who lived in India and dated the niece of the Dalai Lama, one of those kind of guys who was kind of all over the place. Was a rancher in Wyoming, bought his family ranch, became a county commissioner or something like that.
Sounds like a cool dude.
Really cool dude, really open thinker, proponent of firearms, still very liberal, was one of these kind of guys who really believed in a lot of free thinking and open thinking. And
he was one of the founding members of
the EFF. And he wrote that digital manifesto from 1996. He's one of these guys they used to bring to Davos, Switzerland, where all the big world leaders go. And he wasn't a world leader, but he was just a real thinker. And that's why he was at those things. And he wrote this terrific thing called a Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace.
All right.
referred to as the Digital Manifesto, written back in 1996. And
Wow.
we'll put a link to this out on
Yeah, for
the
sure.
teamnerdtechshow.com site, because it's a great thing that looks, you think he was writing it right now. It's really
Wow.
terrific. He was really a thinker, and wrote a lot of great songs too. He was the lyricist for a lot of Bob Weir's great songs. Anyway, that's the EFF is more than just John Barlow. He got sick and died just a few years ago, got
Okay.
cancer, and very active on Twitter. And I was interactive with him for a little while there. A lot of us were. He was just a fascinating fellow, to say the least. And
So it was
sadly
his
perished.
organization that put out this Privacy Badger extension.
Well, no, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, he was one of the founders of it. And then
Okay.
it continued long after he had any direct involvement. It's now a very large entity unto
Got it.
itself, completely
Okay.
nonprofit, and don't accept any big corporate monies. They're not beholden really to anybody, and they really give them credit because they really stand for this stuff. And I like that they do stand for it. They're getting big now in crypto. They're pushing against the idea of governments having a backdoor to cryptology, which
When
I
you say
happen to
pushing,
believe
do
in.
they have lobbyists who are working for that sort of thing?
They have lobbyists. Yes, they do. But what they mainly do is they're more of a think tank than they are lobbyists.
Okay.
Yeah, I might want to think of them that way. It'd be a good way to put it. But
And
they
so
advocate. They advocate very strongly. Yeah.
well, this Privacy Badger that they put out, which looks super cool. I'm definitely
Mhm.
going to put it in and install it on my browsers. Do they do other things that are like this as well? Is this a type of thing that you can look into? Like if you needed anything, like an extension or an app or anything, do they have a list of recommended pieces of information that you can go for if you wanted to be have more privacy on your online habits?
So if you go out to the Electronic Frontier Foundation's site, which is EFF.org, they're an
Okay.
org site. And across the top, you'll see about and issues and the kind of work
Okay.
they do, take action. But then there's a button called Tools.
Oh,
That's where you'll
okay,
find
very
this
handy.
Privacy Badger. Yeah. And they've got some other tools like HTTPS Everywhere, which will shove all of your sites into an encrypted connection whenever you go to a site. It
Oh,
will
very
also warn you
helpful.
when you go to a site that's not an encrypted connection.
Uh-huh.
So you'll know right up front.
Surveillance self-defense is another tool that
Yeah,
they have.
that's a little bit more, that's a little bit more deep.
Got it.
That's a little more weedy.
So
I
they're
like
so
it, but
they're
it's weedy.
so they've got stuff from all different levels of security, basically both white papers and tools and ways you can volunteer and just everything that encompasses.
And what they're about is electronic freedom. And so that's where the security comes from, that you and I should be secure from someone snooping. That would be freedom.
Yeah.
And that's what they're really based on, that this notion that we give up some of our freedom to get access to the stuff is really antithetical to the American way, and that's not what we should be doing. And that's what John Perry Barlow pushed against back in 1996. He saw this coming. This is going to get messy. This thing really has some power, and boy, the people that are powerful are going to want a chunk of it. And here's what we need to do as citizens to protect ourselves. And I'm all in on that, brother.
Very
all in
forward
because,
thinking.
yeah, really forward thinking. And again, very interesting, man. You look up all sorts of stuff on John Barlow. He was a real interesting fellow.
All right, Tim, well, I think that's all that we have for this week, unfortunately, but you want to hang out again next week and chat more nerdy tech stuff?
Let's do.
All right, sounds good. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, you too.